All right, Quentin, you're the first square.
So I was in the Netherlands this last week and also like trying to see how much code we could get written that wasn't written yet before I left. But mostly I worked on, and I was also grading student work. So I was looking at the Weaver, challenges people have using it, and thinking through a little bit more about what its mission could be, kind of an expanded mission for it a little bit. Um, because of our paper, which focuses on using generative AI to make a draft of the interview. Then the question is, well, how do you really kind of want to match up that instant draft capability with like a really easy to see preview of the draft and the ability to edit it easily. So I have been thinking about what features the Weaver needs to do that better and working on integrating the code that lets you upload a form without any fields in it yet and get all the way to the draft of an interview, which that's actually relatively close. I think there's some changes to how the Weaver works that I'm thinking about. The big one is right now, when it comes to things like asking for somebody's name or address or gender, we kind of have built-in screens for those fields. And I'm leaning towards moving those towards being field types, data types, basically, in terms of the Weaver's view of how they work. So like you click add a new field, you can say this is a name field that I'm adding, and it outputs in the YAML file, output the name field's code. So it would be in line. You could decide I want to ask for the name and address on one screen. Also, that would mean there's a question for every name that's put into the YAML file. It uses our template and our labels by default, just like the name fields question does right now. But it wouldn't use wouldn't use the question text, but it would use the label, the prompt that goes with each field, right? So that wouldn't have to be retranslated. And I'm trying to see if that can work without big refactors. It's kind of, this is partly inspired because when we send the code of a document to GPT and we say make an interview draft from this, to figure out some way to translate the different ideas of what the different fields mean to make sense and fit the capabilities of GPT-4, right? I can't tell it. I have to like, it gives back some simplified representation of the fields, which includes like the name of, we'll say like the placeholder for the person's name. I'm going to have to process that again to get back the code that we want to insert there, the special way of invoking things like names and addresses. And it kind of makes sense to have a concept in the Weaver that maps to that too. So I think we could like really significantly improve the user experience of the Weaver to make it better fit the way people author and think about these things. And having this input from GPT-4 is kind of an impetus there to do it. So we'll see where that ends up going. I'm going to try to do this incrementally, but could be some major changes ultimately.
Ultimately.
A little bit mixed, mixed jumping around there, but that's basically what I've been thinking about and working on.
Caroline.
Oh, I've been driving Michelle insane this week.
Was
But
it word stuff or
it was
film stuff?
Both.
both. It was both.
Both and more. Both and even more than that.
Yeah. But she's been extraordinarily helpful, and as usual, I think I couldn't do my job if we didn't have Michelle. I mean, I just couldn't do it. So I just think she's been fantastic, and I have been really a pain in her ass. Partly because of who I am.
No.
But I'm really grateful, and she's just been fantastic. And all my tests just passed for this last interview. And I was a little bit late just because our admin person was in here and I was showing her how to, essentially, we are downloading, even though the final product for the user is going to be a PDF, we're downloading a docx for testing, because then we can take all the text out of the docx, compare it with all the expanded text on the HTML. And she can just dump it into, diff checker rather than reading, 19 pages of PDF to see if they match the HTML, which is, almost impossible. So, so that's huge. That's huge. I'm really very excited about it.
Huge. Also, I like using this time as a place to like memorialize how great everyone is.
Yes,
So there's a video. The
there's a
world
video,
knows.
testimony.
You're on the record, Michelle.
So as Caroline said, we've been doing some work on various form processes and actions, including testing. It occurs to me, I think it would be pretty, as people do more testing of their interviews, I think it could be pretty helpful to have that process in our documentation. So maybe you and I can talk about that at some point, Caroline, when life's not so crazy, to talk about how to create PDF comparison tests. That said, what else? So I made a new step in pretty simple in AleKiln that you can click on an element without navigating, and not just tabs in a tab in our tab module in Toolbox, I think. I mean, for example, collapsible content, et cetera, et cetera. Took a little untangling and ran into the DA install bug, which hounded us all week long, but has gotten resolved now. Bryce and I are having some conversations about security in GitHub Actions. I think the concern we had has been allayed by GitHub's documentation about actions and how they handle triggers for pull requests and how they pass values back and forth, from workflows to composite actions. And if this means anything to anyone, feel free to ask anything you want. But it was unclear if we had some potential script injection issues. I don't think we do, and there are guardrails that GitHub puts around PRs from strangers running workflows, which is great. But it is kind of a general question about, I want to confirm some stuff with Bryce about my understanding of what I've researched, and maybe add a section of the documentation about this specific, guidance that GitHub might have. Just being careful about who you allow to trigger workflows, what you allow various levels of collaborators to do. So yeah, if that's something, a conversation people are interested in having about security, et cetera, et cetera. I'm into that right now. Aside from that, on failures, AleKiln tests are not deleting projects right now. I have to work that out. It actually shouldn't be a huge problem anyway, except for Michael experienced inordinate number of logs when he had a large number of projects in his testing playground, because multiple logs were triggered for each project. When he tested one project, it would create a
Go through all
cascade
the
that would go through all the projects and analyze their files and make logs about how they didn't have the whatever file that he was testing. And so he would get like 33,000 logs in one go for one test. I think this is an internal problem with DocAssemble. Jonathan heard about it now. There was some conversation there. I suspect he's working on dealing with it. But for our part, we're going to work on fixing that up. At some point, the failure, the takedown was like failure check was switched off. It doesn't matter. But so I'll work on that. And I'm trying to remember, I think there was one more thing. I can't remember it right now. I should have written something down as per usual.
Write it down because we're not going to be around next week when it comes back to you.
Yeah, I'll write it down. I don't
Almost
think
2 weeks, right, from today?
Well, the
That's
university is off all of next week and then Monday
Right.
because of the New Year's, but we'll be back at this the week after next.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's only that week.
Yeah, I think it wasn't something urgent. Just things. Yes, and and Mia made some pull requests on the documentation, which were fantastic, about the new isolated server GitHub action. She's so freaking fantastic. I love working with her. And we added like some notes about security for the isolated GitHub server action, that just so everyone here should be aware, I think already, but when you make an isolated server GitHub action, you only want to use the config from your testing server. Your testing server environment should be as close to your production server as possible, but you should not use the config from your production server to set up the isolated GitHub server.
I saw that in the pull request. So is the big issue, what are some of the big differences? You don't want to use real API keys for like make email and stuff. I guess you
Exactly.
use the same server name, and just kind of leave that blank. Is
Yeah,
there any kind of way to, I wonder if there's a way to get there.
The server name isn't as big a deal, but for example, if you have keys for your S3 database in there, right? Or GitHub tokens and permissions, like secrets are great, but they are not foolproof. There are ways that if you exposed if you let someone untrustworthy get into your PRs and trigger stuff, they can log the secrets or save the secrets to a location and things like that. And so if you just have your test server credentials and stuff like that, your test server is compromised, and that sucks, but it's better than your production server, of course.
For sure. Yeah. How important is it to have a configuration? I'm thinking of a lot of interviews where they'll work on an out-of-the-box DocAssemble server, right? Like there's not a lot of.
Yeah, if you don't need a configuration, don't use a configuration.
Is
Or
that
use
already
a
said in the
configuration.
documentation?
Um,
Because maybe we should
no, I could add that.
I'm just thinking through, like, if you do need to change the config and edit it, we might consider like documenting clearly what are the things you remove from the existing config if you want to be as close but not identical. Because I think not everyone will really understand how to make those changes or what they are. But
That's true.
it
It's true.
seems like I'm thinking through the interviews that Mia is testing, for example, where we're working with. I can't think of any of them where it depends on a config value.
Okay. So I would probably need a hand with that because I haven't worked with doc assemble configs much, I don't know how to explain what would be necessary under what circumstances. So I don't think I would be able to do that effectively on my own, but if that's something we can work on in collaboration at some point, I think that would be, that could be really helpful to people. Yeah, I mean, but I can add that people don't have to include a config at all if they don't want to. It's optional because it just uses the default doc assemble config if it doesn't have anything else.
That might be the most important priority, just so people see, hey, here's the section. I can probably ignore it unless I have something that does depend on config. Just an
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah.
I like that.
So I think, yes. I mean, if people run into errors, they will probably talk to us and then we can say, well, you're missing something in your config, you know?
Yeah.
In fact, we could do the instructions the other way around that say,
Start off with the default.
you know, by default, you don't need to like,
Don't use anything. I like that.
this is available, you know, you don't need to put in a config. If you want to,
Be
then
careful.
this variable is available to you. That might be a better approach. Yeah, hadn't thought about that language there. Cool.
There we
Glad I brought
go.
it up.
Doing things in the meeting, actual stuff.
Actual stuff.
That being
I
said,
always
in the-
hesitate to bring stuff up, but like, then it's so
This is the-
useful.
this is
All
the
right.
venue.
This is the venue. Okay.
That being said, I don't have anything really much to add because I'm trying to do end of the semester thing. So I'm going to stop